This is my review for Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers from 1995, the sixth film in the series, the final film in the Thorn trilogy, and the final film with a really long title, which kind of makes it hard to create a thumbnail for. Now, a couple of disclaimers. Firstly, there will be spoilers in this review, but it's not going to affect your enjoyment of the movie, believe me. And secondly, this is mainly going to be the theatrical cut I'm reviewing. I've never even seen the producer's cut, I'll be honest about that. Call yourself a Halloween fan? Well, yes, I do, actually. I first saw this film in the autumn of 1996. My dad rented it for me for my 16th birthday, not long after it had hit the shelves in the UK. And this has been the version I've rewatched and enjoyed for most of the last 25 years. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about in relation to the theatrical cut and the producer's cut, then let me tell you that when this film was being made, there was a lot of wrangling between the studio and the writers, directors on the project, and ultimately the studio got their way and put out what has become known as the theatrical cut, which was more a traditional kind of Halloween movie akin to Halloween 4 and 5. But the writer-directors wanted to have more of a bold approach that introduced lots of elements of the occult and having Myers controlled by magic rocks and things like that. So for a long, long time, all you could get hold of was the theatrical version. It's only in the last few years that a producer's cut, as it's known, has been put together, which is supposedly is the original vision of the movie, and apparently it makes a bit more sense, story-wise. But reviews have been kind of mixed, and I think that's the reason why I've not gone out and jumped all over it. You know, if people have been giving rave reviews and saying, "Oh wow, this really improves Halloween 6 tenfold," I would have watched it by now, definitely. But as it is, some people kind of like it, some people don't, and I've seen a few clips of it on YouTube and read a few things about what it contains and all that stuff with controlling Michael with incantations. It doesn't sound like the sort of thing I would like. There are a few good character scenes with Loomis in it, I've heard, but on the whole, it doesn't sound like a film I could imagine would compete with the theatrical cut, which I really like. The version of the film I've always had for my home media has been this one, that is just a very basic copy of the film on DVD. If they ever brought out like a multi-disc Blu-ray set that was really good, had loads of commentaries and things, and had the producer's cut as a kind of, you know, bonus disc or something, then I would absolutely watch it. I'm just against going out and buying it as its own thing and spending money on it when I just don't think I would like it. Now, the story for this film is very similar to 4 and 5. Michael is out to try and get Jamie again, but this time she's had a baby, so now there's two blood relatives he has to kill. Now, as it happens, he finally takes care of Jamie near the start of this film, so for the rest of Halloween 6, it's Michael versus a baby. Well, actually, returning characters, Tommy Doyle and Sam Loomis, and a new character called Cara Strode come in to bat for the baby, so it's not going to be completely easy for Myers, but there's your general gist. Easily my favourite scene in the whole of this movie is the opening chase sequence between Michael and Jamie. I mean, it's just the most epic chase. I would go as far as to say that this is the best chase sequence in the entire franchise. Big words, but I'm sticking by them. I think it's even better than the legendary one between Michael and Laurie at the end of the original. I mean, this one starts in this kind of industrial basement below Smith's Grove. It's this really creepy looking place. And Jamie's just given birth. She's not running very fast because, you know, her body's just been through an ordeal, but she's doing her best to get away with her baby. Michael's not far behind. He takes out a couple of people, just about fails to get to Jamie before she gets in a car and gets away. But that's not the end of it, because he's following on behind. She gets to this bus station, goes down into the toilets. He comes in and almost gets her, but she escapes out through this back window of a cubicle. Then the chase is back on again in the cars, and he rams her off the road into this farm, and she has to go into this barn and creep through it really silently with all these shadows, and she doesn't know where he is. And finally, he gets her and impales her on this farm equipment. And it feels like I've been describing this scene forever, and the reason being is because it's absolutely epic. It's incredible. It goes on forever, and it's genuinely scary. It's not just long for the sake of being long. It's got so many scary parts to it all the way through. 3 different locations. And finally, Michael gets her. At the end of, 2 films and a bit, he finally takes Jamie Lloyd's life. It is a bit sad to see. It would be even sadder if it was Danielle Harris on the farm equipment instead of J.C. Brandy. But for me, this is still a more satisfying plot development than, say, the way that Michael kills Laurie at the beginning of Halloween Resurrection, because in that film, firstly, you didn't get the great chase, and secondly, Laurie had a chance to kill Michael, didn't take it, so you almost feel cheated a bit that such a legendary character would make a bad choice. But Jamie never had a chance to take Michael out. There was such a feeling of inevitability in this sequence that he would get to her, and you can tell just when she's going from the car to the barn that she's struggling to walk or run that fast because of what her body's been through. This is far from the fast 9-year-old girl that could sprint across lawns in Halloween 4 or 5. And she almost gets away. If it wasn't for that discarded Pringle that she steps on, who knows? Maybe she could have reached that door and evaded Michael. But he does get her, he does finish her off, and it is sad. Now, Dr. Loomis is back in this film as well, and it feels like we get the proper Loomis this time. He was really mean-spirited and just annoying to watch in part 5. But in this one, he's back on form. We don't get him for long. I think he's only got about 10 minutes of screen time. I've heard that in the producer's cut, he's in that a lot more. But I'm guessing that when they took this new path halfway through production, they couldn't bring him back to do more scenes because he died, sadly. Yeah, he passed away before the film hit the theatres. Rest in peace, Donald. We still miss you. Now, Paul Rudd is in this movie as well as Tommy Doyle. He obviously went on to have huge fame as Ant-Man. He's pretty decent in this movie, even though it was very early on in his career. Sadly, though, the role itself is not very well written. Tommy Doyle is very one-dimensional in this film. He's just obsessed with Myers, which would be fine, but for the fact that we get to see nothing else come out of this guy's mouth apart from his crazy obsession with Michael. We'd just like to see a little bit more. You know, what else? Where's he been the previous few years? Where's he going? What are his thoughts about other things? We find out nothing about Tommy other than the fact that he's obsessed with Michael, and it just gets a bit boring by about the halfway point of the movie. We don't even really hear his thoughts about how scary the situation was at the end of the first Halloween. Maybe if he talked a bit more about his past experiences and why he's become this way, we could relate to him a bit more. But as it is, it doesn't even feel like the same Tommy Doyle from that first film, if you see what I mean. Luckily, we don't just have a final boy, we also have a final girl. Cara Strode is played by Marianne Hagan, and it's nice to see a woman in her kind of mid-20s playing this role instead of the usual 18 to 19-year-old teen. It's implied that Cara's maybe not had the best run in life up to this point. She obviously had a kid way too early, but she's raising him right, and she's getting a college education, and I found it much easier to get behind this character than, say, Tommy, which is a bit weird because obviously Cara's new to the series at this point, whereas Tommy should be a returning fan favourite. And isn't it weird looking back on Halloween 6 and seeing the whole dinner scene with this guy being really mentally abusive to all these women, when we get the same thing happening almost at the beginning of Rob Zombie's Halloween? That's famous for being really trailer trashy, that scene in that film. In this one, it's a bit more upper class. I mean, John Strode and Ronnie are basically the same character, sort of repackaged. John Strode is far too proud to be working and earning money, and he likes to throw it in people's faces, whereas Ronnie was quite content to be the opposite, just not earning money and happy and proud about it, sat on his arse doing nothing. Now, I'd like to mention the music in this film because there are some really good sound effects. I'm not the most knowledgeable when it comes to music, so it's hard for me sometimes to describe certain things and use the right terminology, but there's a really good musical cue, I think would be the word to use, where it's kind of like a little mini guitar riff that plays for about 3 or 4 seconds during some of the chases. It's really, really good. And also, during some of the screen transitions in this film, there's like knife effects happening. It feels like swiping effects. Whoever did the sound on this film deserves a lot of credit because it's really good. It's one of the most memorable things about the movie, I think, when I look back on it. And also, this is one of the best films in this series for kills, possibly the best. I do these videos where I rank the kills from each of the Halloween movies, and when I came to doing Halloween 6, I realised when I was listing all the kills that there's just so many amazing ones in this film jostling for top spot. I mean, you've got the one with the exploding head in the basement, and I've already mentioned Jamie on the farm equipment at the start. At some point during the review, though, I've got to eventually address the big elephant in the room when it comes to this film, which is the plot. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you don't have any knowledge about the producer's cut and what goes on in that. Now, it's different for me because my love for this film was cemented in childhood when I was just watching the movie for the Michael Myers side of things and not really thinking too deeply about what Dr. Wynn was up to or what they wanted with this child or that child or what was going on in Smith's Grove Sanitarium, etc., etc. But if you come into this as an adult, now and trying to get into it, you will inevitably come away with questions that you just don't get answers for, and it definitely brings the film down a little bit. You could almost separate this film into two sides. On one side, you've got all the traditional Halloweeny things like the kills, the atmosphere, the scares, the Myers mask, which looks great in this film, by the way. And on the other side, you've got all the stuff that's relatively new to this film and the franchise overall, like the cult storyline and the secondary antagonist, and that's the stuff that falls short. You just can't change a film this late in production and post-production and expect everything to fall in place. You'd be very lucky if it did, but it was just the way of it, because they went with this secondary version, the theatrical cut, that they couldn't completely get rid of all the cult storyline. I'm sure the Weinsteins would love to have done that, but some of that stuff just had to remain inevitably, and it doesn't completely make sense if you really cast a strict analytical eye over the movie. I'm pleased, though, that in recent years, I think the popularity of Curse of Michael Myers has gone up. There was a time whenever I looked at somebody's rankings, whether it be a writer in a piece on Google or something, or somebody's YouTube video, I expected Curse to be in the bottom 3 every time. But just recently I've noticed Curse seems to be moving more towards the middle of most people's rankings, which is definitely a good thing. I think the film is perhaps improving in people's hearts and minds over time. I think a few reasons for that. I think when Resurrection came along, that became everybody's punching bag in this series rather than Curse. Also, I think there would have been a lot of people who watched the Rob Zombie films and were totally appalled by the direction that those movies took, and that allowed them to look back on The Curse of Michael Myers and think, oh, well, at least that one was a more traditional Halloween film. And also, because the producer's cut has come along, I think a few people who were expecting that to be some kind of holy grail were a little bit like, oh, well, it was okay, but it wasn't what I was hoping for over the last 20 years. Maybe the theatrical cut isn't that bad after all, and they've gone back and reappraised it, and maybe they like it a bit more than they used to. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I've got for Halloween 6 today. Three and a half bloody axes out of 5. I had to really battle with myself not to give it 4.5. I think my heart could have easily overrun my head on this one, if you see what I mean. But I still stand by this movie. I think it's way better than your average slasher film. I think it definitely deserves a place in the upper tiers of the Halloween franchise, if you were to rank them. And I thoroughly recommend it. It's a huge improvement over Halloween 5. Right, that's all for today. I'll be back soon with a review for Halloween H2O. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.